Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon. My name's Caroline Baum, and I would like to first of all invite Dr. Lynette Riley to give the acknowledgement of country. Lynette is a Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi woman from Dubbo and Moree. Thank you.
I've got a voice. Marang Nangari, Meng Wilega Warajari. Marang Nangari, Meng Wilega Wathari. Meng Wilega Wathari. Meng Wilega Withery. Meng Wilega Wathari. Marang Nangari, Marang Nangari. I'd like to pay homage and respect to my elders of the Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi nations. In my acknowledgement, what I am presenting to you is my lineage, that I'm a woman of the Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi nations. I'm presenting to you my totems and my clan groups, and in doing that, I'm paying homage and respect to my elders. I also am, in the acknowledgement, paying homage and respect to the people of the Eora Nation, because for me, they bore the brunt of colonisation and did so much that the rest of us could survive. Welcome everybody, and happy International Women's Day.
You do have a voice. Thank you very much, Lynette, and you will be hearing more from Lynette shortly. It's now my great pleasure to ask the Minister for Mental Health, Regional Youth and Women to the stage, Minister Bronnie Taylor. The Minister has been supporting this Older Women's Network initiative to put on an intergenerational panel on International Women's Day for a couple of years in a row now, and it's great to have that support. Welcome, Minister.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much for having me. Can I just acknowledge that absolutely magnificent welcome to country that you just did? I've got goosebumps. Oh, it was just amazing. I mean, I'm amazed that you can sing so well because I'm so jealous because I can't sing at all. So I just think it's amazing. But I've just had the most amazing privilege today that I was in Dubbo this morning for International Women's Day. And this gorgeous young woman from Dubbo, who's actually been appointed to our Regional Youth Task Force, actually gave the welcome to country in language, just like you did. And I just think that's twice in one day I've been able to see that. And gee, it means a lot. And gee, it's magnificent. And thank you so much for making us feel so connected to your history and the history of Aboriginal people today. That really was outstanding. No wonder you're a finalist in the Women of the Year Awards this year. But look, thank you very much. My name's Bronnie Taylor and I'm the Minister for Women in New South Wales, a job that I absolutely love and absolutely cherish, and particularly in Women's Week. So happy International Women's Day to everyone. I think every day really should be Women's Day and every week should be Women's Week, but we have to celebrate it. And we have to make sure that we have the conversations that need to be had. And I think that what days and weeks like this do for us is it gives us that opportunity to do exactly that. I'd like to thank you all very much for being part of this insightful conversation. Just having a really quick chat to some of the panellists just before. I think you're in for a real cracker of a panel. So I think it'll be just terrific. I just wanted to quickly say a few things. I wanted to thank the Older Women's Network for everything that they've done in bringing us all here together. I think it's really important and it's a really great acknowledgement on this very special day. I think forums like this are really necessary because they provide connection and they also create opportunities to be heard. I will mention the events of the last couple of weeks, and I will say that I think one of the most important things is that we have to speak out and we have to use our voice. We have to tell the stories that sometimes are uncomfortable to hear. Because if we don't tell these stories and we don't continue to tell these stories, people stop listening. And we can't have that. We owe the respect to the people that have forged a way before us, those that are forging it now, but most importantly, for those to come. It's been a really, really tough couple of weeks in terms of women in this state and in this country. And I think that we have to keep having those conversations. And can I say too that, with people that are prepared to speak out, that choose to challenge, it takes courage and it takes determination and it takes strength. And may we support them, may we listen to them, may we honour them, and may we value them. My final point was just how good is it to be an older woman? Hey, how good is it? You know, it's really funny. I'm 52. I was 52 last week, and I was saying to someone the other day, you know, like, look, if I'm to be honest, sometimes it's a bit confronting. But the best thing about being an older woman is the confidence that it gives you, and the ability to call stuff out, and the ability to be the fact that we've had to live through so much in our years, come up against so many challenges, and often quite a bit of adversity, but that we've actually got the grit and the determination to call it out and to stand up. And it's really funny, in Parliament, I've been doing a lot of that lately. And when I first came in, which was 6 years ago, so I was a tad younger, I really sort of questioned my ability sometimes. I came in because I was someone that called things out. I did speak up for things, and I was an advocate. But I found it quite intimidating. I'd come from a very female-dominated profession in nursing to a very male-dominated profession in Parliament. And I wasn't used to the aggression and the loud voices and the shouting and the, you know, sort of conversations that you'd have. And when you'd become a bit offended, they'd say, oh, well, that's just politics. And they'd all slap each other on the back and have a beer afterwards. I'm not very good at that, because I think that you need to treat people respectfully and you need to treat them with a certain level of dignity. And I think that's what women do really, really well. And I think that particularly when you're an older woman, I think it gives you some sort of insight and some sort of thing that you're able to draw from within that I didn't feel I had before, that I have now. So although I've lost a lot of things as I age gracefully, I think I've gained more than I ever could have lost. So I think it's really important to have these networks. It's really important to have the conversations that have to be had. I think we all need to look after older women. I think we need to face the issues of financial literacy and homelessness with great passion and great commitment. And I think this is just the sort of forum where you can have those discussions. And I thank you very much for leading the Older Women's Network and having me here today. I hope you have a fabulous afternoon at Parliament House. But most importantly, I hope you have a smashing Women's Week. And can I ask you all, please tell your stories. Please share your stories. And please continue to make sure that we are heard and we are valued, because we deserve it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Minister. And at 52, you only have to wait 3 years to be eligible to join the Older Women's Network. I would now like to call my fellow panellists to the stage. So if Lynette, Zoe and Fauziah would like to come up, that would be great. And I will, shall I introduce them from here? No, let's do that while we're sitting down, maybe. Oh. I think too a welcome and an acknowledgement sounds like an embarrassment of riches. Let's go for it.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, sisters and brothers. My name is Weldon. I'm a Wiradjuri woman from Cowra here in New South Wales. I'm from the waters of the Clare, which is also known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee Rivers. I am the elected chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the culture authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land that we're on. I'd like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations and to you and the many nations' lands that you travelled from today. Our boundaries are known and are lived through our interconnection through the generations across this continent, not from roads and man-made landmarks, but through the natural landscapes of the earth. The Eora Nation's country covers the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with this land, our Mother Earth. Across this beautiful continent of ours, there are hundreds of nations, tribes and clans existing here for over 60,000 years, representing the world's oldest living culture. Aboriginal customs and our cultures has a strong inclusion and importance of women by leading and showing the way for all. In my life, I've been privileged by many incredible Wiradjuri women. My late grandmothers, my aunties Mum Shaw, Pauline, Isabel and Betsy Coe, and of course my staunch mother, Anne Weldon. And to give recognition to never-ending dedication of women, could you all please pause for a moment to remember the many sacrifices that women have made along the way, the ones we will continue to make, and the ones we shouldn't have to. Let us remember the many women that have paved the way for all of us, for the ones walking beside us, and others soon to be following in our footsteps. We must honour and recognise them to keep their trailblazing alive and burning bright in all of us, making our society, our world, inclusive, breaking through barriers and not creating them. We can bring about positive changes to multiple generations, and we do. So starting by a healing to the past generations, by declaring what should not have taken place, to the present day generations and giving them hope, and creating a future for the next generations, for everyone in this country. Whatever walks of life we all come from, and if you don't already know it, with the state that we have, us women rule the world. And along with the mighty men in our lives that leave their egos at the door, walking beside us, fortifying our steps together, we can only truly go forward if we work in partnerships equally. And just as the 2018 NAIDOC theme of "Because of her we can because of you." So know that in the footsteps of our ancestors we walk, leave the prints as we stand. So let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm so glad that you could join us. Well, as everybody I think has said already, what a moment we're in. I felt that a lot of women that I've spoken to on my way here today and in the last few days since an event I did for International Women's Day last week have really been feeling quite emotional and conflicted and caught in a kind of convulsion as a result of the events that are happening in Canberra. And a lot of women have actually said to me in the last couple of days that they feel like there's nothing to celebrate today. And I disagree with that strongly. I think that this is an opportunity to unite behind this year's slogan of Choose to Challenge. I'm hearing more conversations about policy reform, about quotas, and I'm also glad to say that I am actually seeing examples of that in action. So just last week when I was doing an International Women's Day event at Mirvac, the leadership there were telling me that the company is ranked second in the world for gender equality by Equileap out of 200 publicly listed companies, and that it is their intention that next year they want to be the first in the ranking as far as gender equality is concerned. And we're already seeing that the leadership of that company is broadly, it's female 50-50 on the board and in senior leadership. In a completely different sphere, I got to talk to someone who's running a social enterprise, a bakery that's staffed entirely by refugees called Bread and Butter. 50% of the staff at the bakery are women, and one of the things that the company did, that the organisation did to make that possible, was that they halved the weight of the bags of flour so that the women could carry them around as easily as the men. I mean, this stuff is not rocket science, you know. It's about those sorts of practical adaptations that can make a workplace into a fair workplace. I do want to mention and acknowledge the inspirational leadership and courage in the public space of younger women, Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame, whose name could not be more of a contradiction in terms of the tame part, and Chanel Contos. I think what you may not be aware of, but which I was told about recently, was that all three women are being subjected behind the scenes to an enormous amount of trolling and hostility, and they are under an enormous amount of psychological pressure. I think it's really important that intergenerationally we support these women, but I also think it's also important that we do not expect them to fix everything on their own. We need to be there to help them. And so with those thoughts in mind, I'm now going to invite our panel to the stage. Lynette Riley, would you like to come up, and I'll just introduce you as you make your way to the stage. Lynette, you already know, is the Programme Director for Indigenous Studies and Aboriginal Education at the Sydney School for Education and Social Work at the University of Sydney. She is, as she said, a proud Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi woman from Dubbo and Moree. She's currently editing a book on maintaining kinship connections for Aboriginal children in care. Our next panellist is Zoe Norton Lodge. Zoe is a writer and broadcaster who many of you will know for her work with The Chaser, The Checkout, and Reputation Rehab. She's written a collection of memoirs called Almost Sincerely and a series of kids' books called Elizabella. She tried to leave the ABC to work for Triple M in 2019 and was nominated as Best Newcomer in the Commercial Radio Awards, but thankfully she came back to the ABC. Bev Baker, if you'd like to make your way to the stage. As many of you would know, Bev is, of course, the chair of the Older Women's Network in New South Wales, and she's also the CEO of the Aboriginal Education Council and is a past president of the Parent and Citizen Association of New South Wales. You're beginning to see here a few different shades of purple and plum, 50 shades of purple. We're getting a little bit of that. And finally, Fauziah Ibrahim is the co-host of ABC TV's Weekend Breakfast with more than 20 years of experience as a radio and TV journalist. She's worked for Al Jazeera, CNBC, and the BBC. So we're going to attempt to get a perspective on the issues of the day that is both local and international. And I thought before I sit down, I would start by asking each of you, let's start with you, Bev, to comment on how you see this moment.
I think I have been more afraid today than I have probably been in my entire life. I've watched things that we have fought and strived to achieve slowly being dwindled away, and find my younger sisters, those young women who we thought we were paving the way for, having to reinvent and do the things that we thought we had finalised for them. I'm afraid, and I'm not a fearful person, because when I get afraid, start running.
Zoe.
Gosh, that's a really scary thing to hear. I just feel really sad, to be honest. I feel a bit hopeless. I feel confused. I feel let down. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Golly, okay. Lynette.
I'm not surprised. I grew up in an era where institutionalised racism was something that was accepted for Aboriginal women. I tell the story about, several years ago, finally getting access to my family tree, which was created by Norman Tyndale. And he recorded my family tree. I could go back to my mum, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. And in every single case, you could see where they were married to an Aboriginal man. But for each of them, under the family tree where they had the firstborn, in brackets was written, not the natural child of. And so when you actually looked at it, it was that all of those women, Aboriginal girls, had been sent away to work on properties and when they were made pregnant, they were sent back to the reserve. You're just seeing the visible that's been invisible, and I'm not surprised.
Fauziah.
Like Zoe, and I think a lot of women, I feel sad, I feel very let down. Like Bev, I also feel afraid. But I also feel that this is a turning point. I feel that our voices collectively as women for so long have been ignored or subdued or muted, but I feel foundations have been shaken to the core, that this is the time that our voices are starting to get louder and we're starting to get through the sound barrier, shall we say. And maybe that's the optimist in me, but I do feel that this is a time for change, and I'd have hope. I think I need to have hope. Yeah. Otherwise, I just have despair.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bev, you're not one to surrender to fear easily. You're too much of an old hand as a fighter and an activist. So, moving through the fear, what's the next thing for you in terms of what are the next challenges for you to meet in terms of the way that you're campaigning for equality and, as an older woman, fighting one of the less visible, perhaps to some people, aspects of discrimination, which is ageism?
Look, it certainly is. For me, fear is where I draw strength. Fear makes me angry, and you do a lot more in anger than you will ever do in love. And I think men know that, and I think that's something that I learnt. First you get angry, then you get even. And I draw on that. I think that for older women, we are invisible. We have had this dreadful, dreadful experience of these amazing young women being abused. Yet hidden in the same week in a 2-year-old report is the fact that 50 older women a week, 50, are sexually abused in nursing homes or by carers in their own home. And that is outrageous. So that makes me angry. That is what gets the warrior in me up and out there. Because if I'm angry, my job is to make you angry, and nobody likes a mob of angry grannies.
Zoe, there are so many different aspects of feminism to kind of champion, and for some it might be ageism, for some it might be domestic violence. I mean, there are so many issues that you could kind of campaign on. Is there one that's particularly close to your heart?
Oh, I mean, there are a lot that are close to my heart. I actually did a story on aged care for The Checkout, which is a consumer affairs show I worked on a few years ago, and the kind of point of our show was we were always trying to show the consumer, give the consumer good advice and tell them what they can do. It's not just reporting on sad facts. It's about kind of trying to, give people something to do, something productive to do. And it was possibly the hardest one I ever did. It was utterly terrifying. It was when this initial, I can't remember whether it was the inquiry or whatever, but one of the reports had come out, but it wasn't being acted on, and instead they were waiting to do this one. But yeah, no, I'm passionate about that. I'm very passionate about, it's so scary the amount of people we all know who've personally experienced abuse, harassment for so many different reasons. I mean, that's just awful. I guess maybe what my background is in comedy, and when I had a chat to Jane before today, I was saying that just to discuss something maybe slightly more hopeful, an enormous amount has changed in comedy since I first started getting involved in TV, which was in 2012, and like a nice male story, I was totally adopted by The Chaser. I had no idea what I was doing. I was an idiot. I don't know why they took me on board, but they did, and they were so kind, and they really they really saw something in me, and they nurtured me, and they let me do the craziest, they threw me into the most wild stunts that were so scary, and And when I first joined in 2012, there were no other women who were involved in that comedy editorial side of things. And in just sort of, 9 or so short years, it's completely changed. So that's positive.
It really is, and it's great to hear that, because there was an extraordinarily sexist moment when there was an essay that was written somewhere, I can't remember if it was in New York or somewhere, about how women were not funny. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I do. And it's certainly something that used to happen a fair bit. People would say, oh, you're the funniest woman on that bill. And I'd be like, person. I was the funniest person. I mean, that's just my robust ego. But, I was right. No. But I mean, yeah, that's something that, that sort of language, I feel like there has been I think there's a lot of work to do in comedy in a lot of areas, but I certainly have borne witness to some huge progress there.
Well, that's encouraging. Lynette, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your family history. Your parents, for example, were not allowed an education past 3rd grade. And I'm just wondering, do you think gender equality was something that they worried about or they thought about? Or do you think they had some other things to think about that meant that they didn't have the luxury of thinking about gender equality?
No, they didn't. They certainly didn't. All they wanted was that their kids could get an education. I remember getting a copy of my dad's Certificate of Exemption. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the Certificate of Exemption. You should be. It's a document that you had to carry as an Aboriginal person up until the 1970s. And that document, when you opened it up, it said how much of an Aboriginal you were, whether you were half or quarter caste or whatever. Had your photo in it, said where you lived, your age, and you had to carry this certificate. It was called a Certificate of Exemption. You're exempt from being Aboriginal, and you had to have one of those if you wanted your kids to get into school, if you wanted to leave the reserve or mission, if you wanted to get a job. And I was really offended by it. And I said, Dad, why did you get one? And he said, well, I wanted you to get an education. And so for him, it was worth him belittling himself, because he really was belittled by it, so that I could get an education. I wouldn't be here today if he hadn't done that. And earlier this year, I got a promotion. I'm an associate professor now, which is lovely. But it's not just for me, it's validation. I got my PhD, I've got an associate professor's position, and for my community and my family, it's validation. Because if my parents had been given the opportunities, they too could have done similar things.
So, Lynette, can you remember the moment then when issues to do with racism intersected with feminism for you? When did that awareness come about for you?
Oh, probably 6th class, when I realised all you white fellas weren't leaving. No. I think that it's always been there. When kids wouldn't talk to you at school and trying to work out whether they weren't talking to you because you were just really poor and so you weren't dressed as nicely as they were, or when they would say to you, oh, we're not allowed to, if you say, can I go and visit you at your house? And they'd say, oh, no, we're not allowed to have kids at our house. And yet you'd know that all the other kids, girls, and that would go to their house, and you'd go, oh, that's code for they don't want Aboriginal kids to visit their house. So you knew the codes. Even I was explaining in year 11 and 12, I was the eldest, the only Aboriginal kid in senior high school. And so all the other Aboriginal kids had to come to see me. I was in charge. I was the one that they had to come to be looked after. And so the other year 11 and 12 students actually said to me, well, if they keep coming here, we won't talk to you. And I said, well, they're going to keep coming. I can't stop them. And they said, well, in that case, you're ostracised. And none of them would talk to me for year 11 and 12. And it actually made my little gander get up. And I'm one of those people, well, if you tell me I can't, I'm bloody gonna. And so it probably made me more determined to finish year 12. My sister, the following year, faced the same sort of issues, different personality, and she wasn't able to cope. And so she left. So, I think that when you're talking about gender equality, you also need to understand what the impact of racism is on that. and that we might need to be fighting it in different ways.
But do you feel, I want this to be an honest conversation, do you feel that white feminists reached out to help you enough?
Oh, God, no. I'm sorry, but no. I had a few people that really did support me and help me, and I really absolutely value those people. And sometimes it came from the strangest places. Like my dad was a member of the local pub social club, and the guy who owned the pub, the publican, I was in a class with one of his kids, and he heard from Dad that I wanted to go on and be a teacher, and he said to Dad, well, if you need any help, I'm happy to sponsor her. And Dad came home and told me, and I was just so thrilled that somebody had that confidence in me that we never got the sponsorship. I didn't need to, because AB study became available. And that's what got me through school and teachers' college. But I relied on pockets of people to help me. And I'm very grateful for those people, and they will always live in my memory as people that have been absolutely amazing in supporting of me. And so I guess one of the things that I try to do in return is now give that support back.
Fauziah, what were the expectations around you and your sister growing up, given that you come from a Muslim family?
That we had to be good Muslim girls who didn't partake in sports, because if you did PE in school, you had to wear shorts, and good Muslim girls don't wear shorts. So we always had that very uncomfortable conversation with our PE teacher every week saying, sorry, I can't do PE because I don't have shorts, which meant that my sister and I just had to run around in our skirts. And I remember one particular sports day where we just had to run in our skirts and our blouses, because you still had to take part in sports. But my parents are quite strict Muslims, and they expected both my sister and I to be good Muslim girls as well. So we had to be home at a certain time, we had to do certain things, we had to do whatever my dad said. But that in itself was a little bit difficult at home as well, and I think that's where maybe my first inkling of feminism sort of came about, was because my mother was also a teacher, and she's educated, and she knew that she wanted her girls to be educated as well, and she wanted her girls to go forth and, achieve whatever they could. But my dad was afraid of educated women because they would push back. And I remember very clearly both of them having this conversation of, we'll take Fauziah out after she's done her A-levels, and A-levels is what you do before you go to university. So we'll take Fauziah out of school after she's done her A-levels, and then she can become a secretary. And I remember thinking, that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen, it can't happen. And my mum sort of saying, well, maybe she can go on to university, but she's got to wear the hijab, and she's got to be home at a certain time and everything. And my dad said, no, that's not happening. And I remember my mom sort of pushing back, and I remember this sort of this note in her voice where I guess she was going through her own sort of difficulty trying to compromise her Muslimness and at the same time being an educated woman at the same time and wanting more for her daughters. So there was always that sort of tension in the house of we want you to do well and be free, but not so free, not so liberal. Just do what we say, but we will limit your freedom to a certain extent. And going to school with other girls is, of course, and reading and everything, you expand your mind, right? That's what education is all about. And I just kept thinking, there's more, there's out there, there's more things I want to achieve, I want to see, I want to do. I can't just be holed up in this be a good little Muslim woman thing. It's not for me.
So how have you found the different workplaces of different newsrooms that you've been in around the world, say Al Jazeera compared to BBC or CNBC?
Oh, yeah, it's interesting in that working in different newsrooms, I think there's two things here. So there's a sexism thing, and then there's a race thing as well. So working in a newsroom, in an international newsroom, you get a lot of multicultural reporters and journalists and editors, and that's nice because you get a range of cultures, you're exposed to a range of cultures. And that's why I particularly liked working at Al Jazeera, because it was fantastic. You walked in through the front door, you say hello to the Senegalese security guard, and then you walk through to the reception and you say hello to the Ethiopian receptionist, and then you walk through and then you're hearing Mandarin, you hear French, you hear Pakistani, you hear Tamil, and then keep going through the newsroom, and there's all these beautiful languages and different cultures that you're exposed to. But at the same time, Al Jazeera, the headquarters where I worked, was in Doha in Qatar. As a woman, you're second class. You're a second-class citizen. You're not seen. You're not meant to be seen at all. So on the one hand, I really enjoyed the multiculturalism, but I did not enjoy the gender inequality that was there. And from there we moved to Australia. I like working for the ABC. Please don't get it wrong, but it's very white. They're trying to change that, and I acknowledge that, and I appreciate it. What I do miss is the multiculturalism. I miss that a lot, but I do also appreciate the freedom to be a woman here in Australia and at the ABC, and the 50-50 program that they do have, and they are trying to promote more women into management positions as well. So there's that sort of things, working through different newsrooms. That's what I experienced.
Zoe, let's just borrow from your reputation rehab experience and dive right into the current kind of Canberra situation. If Parliament were your client for an issue for a program, where would you start?
Okay, so for anyone who might not have caught it, I did a show last year called Reputation Rehab, where we took scandalised Australians and we tried to sort of rehabilitate their reputation. But the four of us made the show together. We were kind of in charge of who got to be on the show, and we all had to agree. So we had a rule which was like, do we think the punishment fit the crime or not? So one of the first people we looked at was Nick Kyrgios, and now you all love him, right? Okay, I swear you did not before we did that show. It was amazing. He hadn't done a long-form television interview ever before he spoke to us, right? And then a few weeks later, he's on the cover of the Telegraph. You know, like anyway, it was hilarious, but. We really looked at people where we thought there was just a huge disconnect between what had really happened and what the reputational damage was, and also and how much people had suffered. Now, your question about Parliament, I mean, I'm not a magician, you know, I just think, you know, like, burn it down and start again. I just think, I truly just don't think there's any, with my immense skill and interest in the area, it's like the doctor saying, I'm really sorry. It's a bad prognosis. It's too late. It's to palliative care with you, Parliament. I am done. I can't help. I'm sorry.
Because doesn't it strike you as just extraordinary that they don't have protocols in place that ensure the safety of women in the same way that corporate Australia has gotten the message? You know, corporate Australia bit the bullet 20 years ago. Malcolm Turnbull says that the current Parliament reminds him of corporate Australia 20, 30 years ago. So it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary is one word for that state. Yeah, look, I'm sure it can be done. I think there were some interesting lessons that we learnt from reputation rehab. And one of them is about authenticity. You need to really believe somebody. You really need to believe somebody wants to change, that they acknowledge what's happened, or that they're being truthful. And I think that the entire institution is so tied up in feeling like, it makes us feel the opposite of that. We feel current scandals aside, we feel mistrustful of it. We feel like it's always about broken promises. It's about, you know, weasel words and then all that sort of stuff. And then when it comes to an issue like this, I just, you know, I think policy is good, but culture is very difficult to change. Very, very difficult. So, yeah, I don't even know where to begin.
Fauziah, you want to jump in?
I think you're right. Culture is very difficult to change because changing culture means you have to change mindset. And changing mindset means you have to change upbringing, you have to change the background and stuff like that. But just Cara, just going back to what you said about procedures that are in place, the reason there are no procedures that are in place in Canberra at the moment, they call it the Canberra bubble. It's actually the boys' bubble. It's always been the boys' bubble. And every woman who's tried to rise, let's look at Julia Gillard, was shamed. So my worry is that, yes, this review may come through. My worry is that the recommendations will come out. We'll all have the same discussions, the same current affairs shows will come out. We'll talk about it, and then something will happen. It'll just get buried down the line. And we do need strong women in these positions to push the recommendations. My concern is that over the last month, what woman would want to go into politics now? What young woman would want to face that now? And we had this panel discussion with Emma Hassar and Prue Goward on Weekend Breakfast on Sunday. And Prue Goward was very interesting in that she said, there is a need for training. There's a need for training for anybody that comes to Canberra for the first time. They need to be trained how to handle staff, how to handle women. And Emma Hassar herself said, as a young woman who started off, who went to Canberra as an MP, I was overwhelmed by all the protocols that were there, but there was nothing for women. There was no support for women at all. So my concern is that this last month that we've seen, and if this review by Kate Jenkins comes out and it is ignored, that we will not see women in politics, young women entering politics, and that's what we need.
Bev, in response partly to that, I'm just wondering, what is the onus, do you think, on us now, those of us that are not going into politics, those of us that are not in Canberra? Is it up to us to all become activists, and how do we do that? Those of us that are not as outspoken as you are, you're very comfortable at being outspoken. What is the responsibility of a good citizen in response to the events in Canberra, apart from going on the march next Monday?
Look, we have allowed ourselves to be suckered into the belief that political correctness is the wrong thing, that it's a bad move. Political correctness came about because we accepted as a society there are things that are not acceptable and you cannot do them. I think it's time we take the language back. I actually think, in my heart of hearts, it's time for women to get together and form their own party and scare the pants off these nasty little boys, these testosterone-overloaded little private school prats, and really, really start hounding the roles. Feminist egalitarianists, they believe that people are equal and valuable. And that's the language we've got to get back. And if that means that every woman nominates for a party and just swamps them, and don't forget, we outnumber them, that we can do that, then that's what we should do. And even if it's not in your heart and not in your soul to do that, think of your granddaughters, and I'm not saying put it through a mirror of a girl, but think of the kind of world that when we were young, we wanted for ourselves and our parents. Now look back and think if that's good enough for our granddaughters, and my answer is, with 8 of them, no bloody way, is that is what will drive you to make a difference for them. They are not going to fight the fights that I fought. They are not going to be humiliated and disenfranchised and marginalised. And if that means that every single woman has to stand up, then we do an Iceland. We stand up.
Lynette, I felt that you were very tactful when I asked that rather bald question before about white feminists listening to Indigenous voices, and I'm just wondering, what can we do to improve the dialogue? What can we do to improve the listening from us to you, so that as women doing what Bev has just said, we do it together?
I just want to make a comment on what these other ladies have said, and that is that one of the disconnects I see with Parliament, and that's state and federal, is that they're very busy making policies and decisions that everybody else has to follow, but they don't necessarily instigate in their own operations. And I think that's the real concern. And they kind of think they're above that, and they shouldn't be. In relation to understanding where Aboriginal people are at today, I think the key issue is educate yourself, find out the policies and practices that have affected Aboriginal people since colonisation began. Have a look at where a lot of the information has been created. I think that the fact that most of the information that's recorded about Aboriginal people has been created by anthropologists who were all white men. So you're not only getting a gender bias, you're also, the cultural bias is also there. And, that people believe a lot of things that have been written. Just because somebody's got a doctorate or is a professor doesn't mean they know everything. So challenge it and go out and find out what actually has occurred. I had a discussion on Facebook, the fount of all knowledge, even a few weeks ago, where somebody had said to me, "Oh, I've been studying about Aboriginal people and I've been looking at the work of anthropologists." And I said, "Well, it's problematic. Put it into context." And they said, "Oh no, these people know what they're talking about. And did you know that Aboriginal women have no role in corroborees?" And I went, Yep, there's the problem. You think that Aboriginal women have had no role, and that's not true. That's not the case, because you believe everything that you've read, and that the most of that research and the way it was written about Aboriginal people was written to suit the colonist agenda, that we were, as Aboriginal people, we were at the bottom of the evolutionary ladder, and therefore we didn't deserve this land and all the resources it had. And so it was used as justification as to that we didn't have any ownership in this country. And that's why Australia was claimed as terra nullius. So, get an education, get to know things, and don't just rely on the education of the past, because the education of the past was very poor. And I think that that's what we all really need to do as people in Australia. Get an education.
Remembering that today is International Women's Day, Fauziah, I just want to ask you how you feel about how the issues that we're grappling with here today, how they look to you in a sort of wider international context, and whether there's an issue to do with gender that you see on the international radar that's of particular concern to you.
Yesterday, I did a conversation with Koa Beck at the Sydney Opera House for All About Women event. And she's written a book called White Feminists. Now, please don't take offence at the title. I took offence at the title, and I asked her, why white? Why white? Because I know a lot of good white feminists as well. And she said, it's not white as a race. And she said, it's white from where feminism came from. And feminism came from, and I'm seeing this is what's happening and changing across the globe. Feminism, the roots were gender equality, equal pay, equal job opportunities, equal treatment. But where it is now evolving towards now is equality amongst women. So it's not just equal pay or gender equality, or we want to be the same as men or get the same education as men, the same opportunities as men, but all women need to be equal. And what I like about what Koa said in her closing arguments was that she said, we need to look at our most disadvantaged sisters, the marginalised groups, the ones who are homeless, the ones who are subject to violence, the ones who need to work 3 jobs just to get by. We need to look at them, we need to pull them up, and then that's where the new feminism is. So it's intersectional. It's no longer about gender equality. it's about helping the worst women at the bottom of the rung. And I'm starting to see that around the world right now too.
It's interesting, Bev, because of course we're seeing that the fastest growing demographic for homeless women, so talking about disadvantage, is women over 55 in Australia as a result of things to do with divorce, property market, lack of superannuation. This is an enormously concerning statistic. What's your sort of take on what we need to do to address that?
Look, this really is a problem. It's a worldwide problem, but I'm talking about here. And what we need is absolute commitment from a government that has none. We've had over 30 years of no investment in community housing. That is an obscenity, where everything has been privatised and outsourced. We've seen the damage that has done, especially in aged care and the umpty-doo squillion tome volumes that we have of the abuse in there. We have swallowed the pill of deregulation and are worried about regulation. We need to re-regulate. We need to work together to ensure that everyone has a place. The fact that we have people on that wretched thing called, I think, New Start or Job Start or Job Seeker or whatever they've called it these days, where it will not pay people enough money to live, where you've got 30% of aged pensioners in this country, one of the wealthiest in the world, living below the poverty line. I think it is time for us to join together and go after where the real enemy is. And the real enemy is the rich, the uber rich, those who have benefited from the generosity of the past and who refuse to give back, who don't even want to pay their way in their taxes, who will do everything they can to shift their money offshore so they hang on to more and more, and those who control the government, who governs for them, not for the rest of us. That those are the sorts of things I think that we've got to stand up against. Why is it that people who are facing their old age now are looking at a tax on their only asset, their family home, where people with millions invested in the gamble called the stock market not only get it tax-free, but get it with money coming back to them for money they've not paid? I think that we really have to seriously think about the kind of world we want. Why is it in 2021 there is such resistance to having an Aboriginal voice in our parliament? What a well over 60,000 a year and counting society knows about land management, about climate change, about family. The family networks in Aboriginal cultures are awesome, and I thank Lynette for teaching me about them. They're just amazing. It's the sort of knowledge that we need, and women can share that knowledge. Women are the hands that rock the cradle. We can actually share that knowledge and build that together. But we've got to change that dialogue. We've got to change that conversation, and we have to talk amongst ourselves, to ourselves, and walk with all women walk together, whether they're Liberal, Labor, left, right, black, green, brindle, or whatever colour. We walk together because the issues that affect one affect all.
Look, those are very stirring words with which to close our hour together, which has absolutely flown by. I always think, imagine if all these issues were solved and we could have a panel where we talked about creativity and about aspirations for things that didn't mean that we kept having to have the same old conversations about equal pay and domestic violence and poverty and ageism and all of these things. We can get past this stuff and have more interesting conversations even than the one that we've had here today. For now, though, will you please join me in thanking Bev, Zoe, Lynette, and Fauziah, and thank you for being here.